My name is Juniper, and I'm 28. I walked into that lawyer's office in Ohio. Boots, caked with mud, smelling like the pigs I'd been tending all morning. My cousin Tabitha leaned over her perfume sharp and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "She smells like pig manure." The room's snickered eyes cutting through me like knives. I wanted to shrink, but something in me held firm. My dad's will was about to be read, and I had no idea what was coming. Stick with me to see how it all unraveled. Where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you've ever felt judged and subscribe to follow my story. The lawyer's office smelled of old books and lemon polish, a stark contrast to the barn I'd left behind. I sat in a creaky chair, my hands folded tightly in my lap, still stinging from Tabitha's words. My cousin's glossy nails tapped her phone, her smirk barely hidden as she leaned toward our Uncle Harold. The room was packed with relatives, their polished shoes and pressed shirts, making me feel like I'd wandered into the wrong world. My work jeans were stiff with dirt, and I caught a whiff of the farm on myself, a reminder of the pigs I'd fed at dawn. I pushed the thought away, focusing on Leonard the lawyer, who adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. He began reading Dad's will, his voice steady but distant, like he was reciting a grocery list. My heart thudded. I wasn't expecting much, just enough to keep the farm afloat. The mortgage payments were crushing us, and the equipment was older than I was. Dad had always said the land was our roots, but roots don't pay bills. I leaned forward, hoping for a lifeline, something to prove I hadn't been pouring my life into a sinking ship. Leonard listed small bequests first. Tabitha got a vintage car Dad had tinkered with in the garage, worth a few grand. She raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed, and muttered something to Harold about selling it. My cousin Preston, who hadn't set foot on the farm in years, was left a set of Dad's old fishing gear. He nodded curtly, his jaw tight, like he was above it all. I waited, my palms sweaty, but my name didn't come up. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I glanced at the camera in the corner, its red light blinking, capturing every moment for Harold's so-called family memories. I wondered if it caught the way my chest tightened. Harold shifted in his seat, his voice cutting through the silence. "Juniper, you know the farm's a lost cause, right?" His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, like he was testing me. Heads turned, and I felt their stares, a mix of pity and amusement. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "The farm's been in our family for generations," I said, my voice quieter than I meant. "It's what Dad wanted." Harold snorted, leaning back. "Sentiment doesn't pay debts, girl. You're wasting your time." I wanted to snap back, to tell him he had no right to judge when he'd never lifted a finger to help. But the words stuck. I looked down at my hands, calloused from years of hauling feed and fixing fences. I thought of Dad, the way he'd wake before dawn to check the sow's health, his hands gentle despite their roughness. When I was 10, he'd shown me how to bottle feed a runt piglet, his voice soft as he said, "This land is alive, Juniper. It's ours to protect." That memory felt like a tether holding me steady. But now, with Leonard droning on and my name still absent, doubt crept in. Had Dad believed in me, or was I just fooling myself? Tabitha's voice broke my thoughts. She leaned forward, her earrings glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Honestly, Leonard, can we speed this up? Some of us have places to be." Her gaze flicked to me, her lips curling. "And maybe open a window. It's getting stuffy in here." A few cousins chuckled and my cheeks burned. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. She wasn't just mocking me. She was performing, making sure everyone saw me as the dirty farm girl who didn't belong. Leonard ignored her, mentioning a letter from Dad that would be read later. My ears perked up. A letter? I hadn't known about that. What could Dad have written, and why was it being held back? I glanced at the others, wondering if they knew something I didn't. Tabitha's smirk faltered for a split second, like she was as surprised as I was. Harold's expression didn't change, but his fingers drummed the armrest, a nervous tick I hadn't noticed before. The camera's lens seemed to zoom in, though I knew it was just my imagination. Whatever that letter held, it was important, and I needed to know why. I shifted in my seat, trying to shake the unease settling in my gut. The will reading wasn't over, but the silence around my name was deafening. I'd spent years keeping the farm alive, skipping college, working nights at a diner to cover costs. Had Dad seen that? Or had he given up on me too? The thought hit like a punch and I gripped the chair's edge, willing myself to stay calm. I couldn't let them see me crack, not with Tabitha's eyes gleaming and that camera rolling. But the hope I'd carried into this room was slipping and I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on. My heart was still racing from Harold's jab, and Tabitha's snide comment about the window lingered like a bad taste. I forced my eyes to Leonard, hoping he'd move on to something, anything that would give me a reason to be here. The lawyer flipped a page, his glasses slipping down his nose. He listed more bequests: a silver watch for my Aunt Marjorie, a savings bond for my cousin Bailey. Each name felt like a door slamming shut on me. I shifted the chair, creaking under me, and caught Preston staring at his phone, his face blank. He hadn't even looked my way since Harold's comment about the farm. The room was a maze of whispers and sideways glances, and I was trapped in the middle, my hope unraveling with every word Leonard read. I tried to focus on the letter he'd mentioned, the one from Dad. What could it say? My mind raced back to the last time I saw him, frail in his hospital bed, his hand squeezing mine as he whispered about the farm. "You're the heart of it, Juniper," he'd said. I'd believed him, but now, with my name still missing from the will, I wasn't so sure. Had he changed his mind? Had I let him down? The thought gnawed at me, sharp and relentless, like a splinter I couldn't pull out. Marjorie cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Juniper, maybe it's time you thought about moving on. The farm's dragging you down. You're young. Get a real job, a real life." Her tone was all concern, but her eyes were cold, calculating. She smoothed her skirt, her gold bracelet catching the light. I felt my stomach twist. A real life I'd been up at 4 every morning, mucking stalls, balancing books, keeping Dad's dream alive while she sipped coffee in her city condo. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught, tangled in anger and shame. Bailey nodded along with Marjorie, her lips pursed like she was tasting something sour. Even Preston glanced up, his expression unreadable, but he didn't defend me. I looked around, searching for an ally, and noticed a woman in the corner sitting apart from the family. She had graying hair pulled into a loose bun, her hands folded calmly in her lap. I didn't know her, but her eyes met mine for a moment, steady and kind. She hadn't laughed with the others, hadn't whispered or smirked. Who was she? I hadn't seen her at Dad's funeral, but there was something familiar about her, like a face from an old photo. Before I could dwell on it, Tabitha's voice sliced through again. "Leonard, seriously, are we done yet? I've got a flight to catch." Her impatience was a performance, her eyes darting to me, daring me to react. I bit my lip, tasting blood, and stayed silent. Leonard adjusted his papers, unfazed. "There's more to cover," he said, his voice flat. He mentioned the letter again, saying it would be read after the main bequests. My pulse quickened. Why the delay? I glanced at the stranger in the corner, wondering if she knew something. She was watching Leonard now, her expression unreadable, but intense, like she was waiting for something too. Harold's fingers were still drumming faster now, and Tabitha's foot tapped under her chair. The camera's red light blinked steadily, recording every second of this slow unraveling. I felt exposed, like the lens was peeling back my skin, showing the world how out of place I was. Then Leonard said something that made my breath catch. "The farm's mortgage," he began, then paused, looking at me. "It's been a point of discussion." I leaned forward, my hands gripping the chair. Discussion? What did that mean? Had Dad left instructions about the farm, or was it being sold out from under me? Marjorie leaned toward Harold, whispering something I couldn't hear, and Tabitha's smirk widened like she knew something I didn't. Preston finally looked at me, his eyes flickering with something, guilt maybe, or pity. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I stayed frozen, my hope hanging by a thread. The stranger in the corner shifted her movement, subtle but enough to draw my eye. She reached into her bag, pulling out a small notebook, and jotted something down. It was a tiny action, but it felt significant, like a piece of a puzzle I couldn't yet see. Leonard continued, mentioning a trust fund tied to the farm, but he didn't say who it was for. My heart sank deeper. If it wasn't mine, then what had all my years of work been for? I thought of the piglet I'd saved last spring, the one Dad had named Lucky, how I'd sat up all night to keep it warm. Had that meant nothing? The room spun, and I gripped the doodle in my pocket, the one Dad had drawn years ago, a clumsy sketch of a pig with a lopsided grin. It was all I had left of him, and it wasn't enough to stop the ache spreading through me. Tabitha's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it, her lips curling into a smile that sent a chill down my spine. She leaned toward Bailey, whispering something that made them both laugh softly. I couldn't hear it, but I didn't need to. It was about me, about the farm, about how I was fooling myself to think I belonged here. The camera caught it all, and I wondered what the footage would show a room full of people who saw me as a joke. The letter, the trust fund, the stranger. It all swirled in my head, but one thing was clear: I was losing ground, and the family I'd once trusted was slipping away, leaving me to fight for something they'd already written off. The air in the lawyer's office felt thick, like I was breathing through a wet cloth. Leonard's words about the farm's mortgage hung in the room unanswered, and the weight of everyone's eyes pinned me to my chair. Tabitha's smug smile burned into me, her whispered jab to Bailey still echoing in my head. I wanted to bolt, to run back to the farm where the pigs didn't judge me, but I stayed my fingers clutching the doodle in my pocket. Dad's pig sketch was my anchor, but it couldn't stop the storm building inside me. Tabitha leaned forward, her voice syrupy but sharp. "Leonard, can we get to the point? Who gets the farm? It's not like Juniper's turning it into anything but a mud pit." Her words sliced through me, and the room erupted in soft chuckles, Cousins nodding like she'd cracked a clever joke. My face flushed hot and prickly. I opened my mouth to snap back, but my throat locked up. Years of mucking stalls, repairing barns, and skipping sleep to balance the books flashed through my mind. A mud pit. I'd poured my soul into that land, and she was turning it into a punchline. Harold chimed in, his tone all business. "The farm's a liability, Leonard. Developers are circling, offering real money. Juniper's just holding it hostage with her stubbornness." His words hit like a slap. Hostage, I'd been the one keeping it alive while he played golf and cashed Dad's checks from afar. I looked at Preston, hoping for a flicker of support, but he was staring at his shoes, his silence louder than any insult. My brother, who used to chase piglets with me, was letting them tear me apart. I forced myself to speak, my voice shaky but firm. "The farm's not for sale. It's Dad's legacy." Harold snorted, rolling his eyes. "Legacy. It's a money pit, and you're too naive to see it." The room tilted, and I gripped the chair's armrest, my nails digging into the wood. Naive, I'd spent my 20s learning irrigation systems, negotiating with feed suppliers, and burying stillborn piglets in the rain. I wasn't naive. I was fighting for something they'd never understand. Tabitha's laugh cut through high and brittle. "Oh, please, Juniper. You're not a farmer, you're a charity case. Why don't you clean up and get a job that doesn't make us all gag?" She waved a hand, her rings flashing, and the cousins snickered again, louder this time. My chest tightened, rage bubbling up so fast I could barely breathe. I wanted to lunge across the room to shake her until she understood what the farm meant, but I stayed rooted, my body trembling. The camera's red light blinked in the corner, catching every second of my humiliation. I wondered if Harold would replay this later, laughing at the farm girl who dared to dream. The stranger in the corner, the one with the gray bun, shifted in her seat. Her eyes locked on Tabitha, narrowing slightly, and she spoke for the first time, her voice calm but firm. "That's enough. This is a will reading, not a roast." The room went quiet, Tabitha's smirk faltering. I stared at the woman, my pulse racing. Who was she to step in? Her defense felt like a lifeline, but it also made me uneasy. She knew something, I could feel it, and her presence was stirring up questions I wasn't ready to face. Leonard cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Let's continue," he said, but Tabitha wasn't done. She leaned toward Bailey, her voice low but loud enough for me to hear. "I bet she's planning to mooch off whatever's left. Probably thinks she's getting the trust fund." My blood ran cold. Mooch, I'd never asked for a dime from anyone. The trust fund Leonard mentioned earlier flashed in my mind, but I didn't dare hope it was mine. Still, Tabitha's words were a knife twisting deeper with every syllable. I looked at the stranger again, her notebook now closed in her lap, her face unreadable. What did she know about Dad's plans? My thoughts were interrupted by a rustling behind me. I turned to see Harold whispering to Marjorie, their heads closed, their expressions tense. I caught a snippet, something about securing the estate. Securing it from what? From me. My stomach churned. Were they plotting to take the farm before the will was even read? The idea felt paranoid. But Tabitha's earlier smirk, Harold's drumming fingers, it all added up to something ugly. I glanced at Preston, willing him to look at me to say something, but he was lost in his phone again, shutting me out. The camera's lens seemed to loom larger, its unblinking gaze a reminder that this wasn't just a family spat, it was a spectacle. My hands shook as I tucked the doodle deeper into my pocket, trying to hold on to Dad's memory. But the room was closing in, and the family I'd once trusted was turning into strangers, their words carving wounds I wasn't sure I could heal. Tabitha's voice rang out again, sharp and gleeful. "Come on, Leonard. Tell us who gets the real prize. I'm dying to see her face when she gets nothing." My heart stopped, and I knew this was only the beginning of the pain. Tabitha's words hung in the air, a taunt that made my skin crawl. I could feel the room waiting, every eye on me, expecting me to crumble. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out the low hum of the air conditioner. I wanted to scream to tell them they didn't know me, didn't know the farm, didn't know Dad, but my voice was trapped, buried under years of swallowing my anger. Leonard adjusted his glasses, oblivious to the storm brewing, and continued reading, his voice a monotone drone. I clung to the hope of that letter, the one he'd promised to read later, but it felt like a distant lifeline slipping through my fingers. Preston shifted in his seat, finally looking up from his phone. His eyes met mine, and for a split second, I thought he'd say something, stand up for me like when we were kids, and he'd scare off the bullies who mocked my muddy boots. But he leaned toward Harold instead, his voice low. "She's always been like this, too stubborn for her own good." The words hit harder than Tabitha's barbs, slicing open a wound I didn't know was there. My brother, the one who'd left the farm for a city job and never looked back, was siding with them. I felt my chest cave like the air had been sucked out of me. Had he always seen me this way, as a fool chasing a lost cause? I turned away, my gaze landing on the stranger with the gray bun. She was watching Preston now, her lips pressed into a thin line, her notebook still in her lap. Her presence was a puzzle I couldn't solve, a quiet anchor in this chaos, but it wasn't enough to steady me. Marjorie spoke up, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Juniper, dear, you're wasting your youth on that place. Your father wouldn't have wanted you to throw your life away." Her words were a lie wrapped in kindness, and they stung worse than Harold's blunt dismissal. I remembered Dad's laugh, the way he'd clap my shoulder after a long day in the fields, proud of every blister I earned. Had Marjorie ever seen that side of him? Or was she rewriting his memory to fit her narrative? I tried to focus on Leonard, but my thoughts were spiraling. The farm wasn't just land. It was Dad's dream, our history, the place where I'd learned to be strong. I'd stayed when everyone else left, when Preston moved to Chicago, when Marjorie and Harold stopped visiting. I'd chosen the farm over college, over boyfriends, over a life that didn't smell of hay and sweat. And now they were tearing it down, tearing me down like my choices meant nothing. My hands shook and I tucked them under my thighs, hiding the tremor. The camera's red light blinked steadily, a silent witness to my unraveling. Tabitha's phone buzzed again and she glanced at it, her smile sharp and secretive. She leaned toward Bailey, her voice a stage whisper. "I heard she's been begging developers to hold off, like she's got any leverage." My blood ran cold. How did she know that I'd spent weeks on the phone pleading with a local firm not to push their offer, promising I'd find a way to keep the farm running? It was private, desperate, something I'd shared with no one but Dad's old friend at the bank. Had someone betrayed me? I looked at Harold, his face unreadable, then at Preston, whose eyes flicked away. The room felt like a trap, every whisper a wire tightening around me. The stranger Sheila. I heard someone call her, shifted again, her pen tapping her notebook lightly. She looked at me, her expression soft but urgent, and slipped a folded note across the table. I hesitated, my heart pounding, then reached for it, my fingers brushing the paper. "Your father trusted you," it read in neat, slanted handwriting. The words were a jolt, a flicker of hope, but they also deepened the ache. Trusted me with what? The farm. The letter, something else. I stuffed the note in my pocket next to Dad's doodle, my mind racing. Sheila's eyes held mine steady and knowing, but before I could process it, Marjorie's voice cut in again. "This is ridiculous," she said, her tone sharper now. "That farm's a burden, and Juniper's dragging the whole family down with it. We deserve better than her obsession." The cousins nodded, their murmurs growing louder, a chorus of agreement that felt like a wall closing in. I looked at Preston, willing him to speak, to remember the summers we'd spent rebuilding fences together. But he stayed silent, his face a mask. The betrayal was a physical pain, a knot in my gut that wouldn't loosen. I'd thought he understood, thought he'd seen what the farm meant, but he'd chosen their side, leaving me alone in this fight. Leonard paused, looking up from the will. "There's one more matter before the letter," he said, his voice heavy. "It's about the farm's future." My breath caught my body tensing. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. Tabitha's smile widened, predatory, and Harold leaned forward, his eyes glinting. I felt Sheila's gaze on me, urging me to hold on, but the room was spinning and I was sinking, drowning in their judgment. The camera kept rolling, capturing the moment my world teetered on the edge, and I braced myself for the blow I knew was coming. Leonard's words about the farm's future hung like a storm cloud, and the room went still, every breath held hostage. My heart slammed against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the ticking clock on the wall. Tabitha's predatory smile gleamed and Harold's eyes burned with a hunger I hadn't seen before. Sheila's note tucked in my pocket felt like a burning coal, its words, "Your father trusted you both, a shield and a weight." I braced myself, my hands gripping the chair as Leonard cleared his throat and leaned over the will. He spoke slowly, each word a hammer. "The entirety of the estate, including the farm, the house, and the trust fund, is bequeathed to Juniper." The room exploded. Tabitha gasped, her chair scraping back as she shot to her feet. "That's impossible," she spat, her voice shrill. "There's been a mistake." Harold's face turned red, his fists clenching on the table. "This is fraud," he roared, pointing at Leonard. "She manipulated him, didn't she?" I sat frozen, my mind reeling, unable to process the words. Me. Everything, the farm, the house, the money, it was all mine. My chest tightened, a mix of shock and something sharper, like the air had turned to glass. I'd spent years scraping by, counting pennies for feed, praying the bank wouldn't foreclose. Now, in one sentence, Dad had given me everything. But the room's fury swallowed any relief. Marjorie's jaw dropped, her bracelet jangling as she clutched Harold's arm. Preston stared at me, his eyes wide like he was seeing a stranger. The camera's red light blinked, capturing the chaos, and I felt exposed, like my soul was being broadcast to the world. Tabitha rounded on me, her nails digging into the table. "You conniving little," she hissed, cutting herself off, her face twisted with rage. "You think you deserve this? You who can't even wash the stink off." Her words were venom, but they barely registered. My mind was stuck on Dad's choice on the trust fund. Leonard mentioned a sum I couldn't even fathom. Why me, I'd stayed sure, but I'd never asked for this. I thought of Dad's last days, his frail hand in mine, his eyes bright with something I hadn't understood. Had he planned this all along? Harold slammed his hand on the table, making me jump. "I demand a recount," he barked. My brother was no fool, Leonard. He wouldn't leave everything to her. His voice dripped with contempt, and I felt it like a punch to the gut. To her. Like I was nothing, a mistake in Dad's judgment. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but my throat was dry, my thoughts a jumbled mess. Sheila stood, her presence steady in the storm. "I was there when he signed it," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "I'm a notary. It's legal." Tabitha whirled on, her eyes blazing, but Sheila didn't flinch. The room spun, voices overlapping in a furious chorus. Bailey whispered to Marjorie, her words lost, but her sneer clear. Preston stood his chair tipping slightly and stormed toward the door without a word. My heart sank, his silence a fresh betrayal. I thought maybe he'd be proud, but he couldn't even look at me. I glanced at Sheila. Her eyes locked on mine, urging me to hold steady, but the weight of their anger was crushing. Had Dad known this would happen, that his choice would tear us apart? I touched the note in my pocket, then the doodle beside it, needing something to ground me. Dad's trust was a gift, but it felt like a curse, turning the family I'd once loved into enemies. Tabitha's voice rose again, shrill and desperate. "She doesn't even know how to manage money," she shrieked, pointing at me. "She'll ruin it all, just like she's ruined the farm." My stomach twisted, doubt creeping in. Could I handle this? The farm was one thing, but a trust fund, a house, the whole estate. The camera kept rolling its lens, a cold witness, and I felt the truth sinking in. This wasn't just a gift, it was a battlefield, and I was standing alone in the crossfire. The room was a furnace, every shout and glare stoking the flames. Tabitha's accusation that I'd ruin everything echoed in my skull, and I felt the weight of their eyes, a jury ready to convict. My fingers brushed Sheila's note in my pocket, but its words felt hollow now, drowned out by the chaos. Leonard raised a hand for silence. His face strained and pulled out a sealed envelope from his briefcase. "This is your father's letter," he said, his voice barely cutting through the din. "It's to be read now." My heart lurched. The letter. I'd clung to its promise, but now with the room erupting, it felt like a bomb about to detonate. Tabitha lunged forward, her hand snatching for the envelope. "That's mine," she snapped, her voice cracking with desperation. He meant it for the family, not her. Leonard yanked it back, but her nails grazed the paper, tearing a corner. I gasped, my body jolting like I'd been struck. That letter was Dad's voice, his final words, and she'd clawed at it like it was trash. Marjorie stood, her voice icy. "Leonard, this is absurd." My brother was ill, easily swayed. Juniper must have pressured him. Her words were a blade carving into the trust I'd held onto. Pressured him. I'd spent Dad's last months reading him old westerns, spoon-feeding him soup, wiping his brow. I'd never asked for anything, not once. My eyes stung, but I blinked hard, refusing to let them see me break. Bailey chimed in, her tone dripping with scorn. She probably whispered in his ear while he was dying, playing the dutiful daughter. The cousins murmured agreement, their voices a rising tide drowning me. I looked to Sheila, desperate for her calm to anchor me, but even she seemed shaken, her hands clenched in her lap. Leonard opened the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly, and began to read. "To my family, I know this choice will surprise you, but Juniper is my legacy. She's the only one who saw the farm's soul." My breath caught Dad's words, a lifeline and a wound. Legacy. The room roared back to life, Harold shouting over Leonard. "This is nonsense," he bellowed. "She's a nobody, a farmhand at best." My chest burned, his words, stripping me bare, reducing years of sacrifice to nothing. Tabitha's face was a mask of fury, her mascara smudging as she pointed at me. "You stole this," she screamed, her voice raw. "You guilted him into it, didn't you?" I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak, but no one cared. The camera's lens loomed, its red light, a cold eye recording my shame. There raged the letter's truth. I wanted to grab it, to hold Dad's words close, but my body wouldn't move. Marjorie's voice rose sharp and venomous. "We'll contest this, Juniper. You won't get a cent." The threat landed like a stone, heavy and final, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. I glanced at the assistant Caleb standing by the camera, his face pale as he adjusted the tripod. He met my eyes for a second, then looked away like he couldn't bear to witness this. The letter continued, Leonard's voice faltering as he read Dad's reasons, his belief in my strength, my love for the land. Each word was a gift, but it came at a cost, turning the family against me. Bailey whispered to a cousin loud enough for me to hear. "She's been planning this, probably laughing at us all along." The lie stung, twisting the knife deeper. I hadn't planned anything, I'd only tried to survive. Harold stepped forward, his face inches from Leonard's. "You'll hear from my lawyer," he growled, then turned to me, his eyes blazing. "You think you've won, but you're nothing without us." The words were a punch knocking the air from my lungs. Nothing I'd built the farm back from ruin, nursed it through drought and debt, while he'd done nothing but judge. My vision blurred not from tears but from rage, grief, disbelief, all colliding in a storm I couldn't contain. Sheila reached out her hand, brushing my arm, but I barely felt it. The letter was still being read, Dad's voice echoing through Leonard, but it was lost in the screams, the accusations, the hatred. I stood at the edge of a cliff, the family I'd known crumbling away, and all I could feel was the ache of being utterly, impossibly alone. The lawyer's office was a battlefield, the air thick with shouted accusations and the echo of Dad's letter. My ears rang Harold's words, "You're nothing," slicing deeper than I could bear. I stood, my legs unsteady, the torn letter still clutched in Leonard's hand, its words a faint pulse in my chest. Tabitha's mascara-streaked glare followed me, Marjorie's threat to contest the will hanging like smoke. I needed to move, to breathe, to escape the camera's cold stare and the family's venom. My hand brushed Sheila's note in my pocket, and something shifted, a spark of resolve flickering through the fog of pain. I faced the room, my voice low but steady. "I'm keeping the farm," I said, my words cutting through the chaos. "It's mine and I'll fight for it." Tabitha scoffed, her laugh brittle, but I didn't flinch. Harold's eyes narrowed, his mouth opening to retort, but I turned to Leonard, ignoring him. "What do I need to do to make this official?" My question was a lifeline, a step toward claiming what Dad had given me. Leonard blinked, surprised, then nodded. "We'll finalize the paperwork," he said, his voice calm despite the tension. The room erupted again, Marjorie's voice shrill. "You'll regret this, Juniper. You can't handle it." I met her gaze, my jaw tight. "I've handled it for years," I said, my words sharper than I'd intended. The truth of it steadied me, years of dawn chores, late-night repairs, and quiet moments with Dad planning the farm's future. I wasn't the nobody they claimed. Sheila gave me a small nod, her eyes bright with something like pride, and I felt a surge of strength, fragile but growing. Harold stepped closer, his voice a growl. "You think you're smart, but I've got developers ready to buy that land. Sign it over now, or you'll lose everything." His offer was a trap laced with greed, and I saw the farm in my mind, its rolling fields, the barn where I'd cried after Dad's funeral. "No," I said, my voice firm. "It's not for sale." His face darkened, but I turned away, my heart pounding with a defiance I hadn't known I had. The camera caught it all, and for the first time I didn't care what it saw. I moved toward Leonard's desk, my boots heavy on the hardwood floor. "Let's get the papers ready," I said, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. Tabitha lunged forward, her voice a hiss. "You're making a mistake, Juniper. You'll crash and burn." I ignored her, focusing on Leonard as he pulled out a folder. My mind raced, picturing the farm's future, new irrigation, a co-op with local farmers' ideas Dad and I had dreamed up over coffee. I wasn't just saving the land, I was building something new. Sheila approached, her presence a quiet anchor. "Your father knew you could do this," she whispered, her hand brushing my arm. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Her words were a tether pulling me back to Dad's belief in me. I glanced at Caleb, the assistant by the camera, and he gave a subtle nod, his fingers tapping the tripod. Later he mouthed, and I caught a glint in his eye, like he had something to share. My pulse quickened, sensing an ally in this mess, but I couldn't dwell on it now. Marjorie's voice cut through, cold and biting. "This isn't over, Juniper. We'll fight you every step." I met her gaze, unflinching. "Then fight?" I said, my words simple but heavy. "I'm ready." Her face paled, and I saw the first crack in her confidence, a flicker of doubt. I turned to leave, my steps deliberate, each one grounding me in my choice. The farm was mine, not just in name but in spirit, and I'd build it into something they couldn't touch. Outside, the Ohio dusk was cool, the sky streaked with pink and gold. I paused by the office steps, the lawyer's card in one hand, Dad's doodle in the other. The weight of the day pressed down, but I stood taller, my shoulders squared. I slipped the doodle back into my pocket and pulled out a single seed I'd found in Dad's old coat that morning, a tiny, hard promise of growth. I pressed it into the soil by the steps, my fingers lingering in the dirt, and stood my eyes fixed on the horizon, steady and unbroken. Leonard's folder lay open on the desk, its pages a map to a future I was only beginning to grasp. My declaration to keep the farm still echoed in the room, a line drawn in the sand. Tabitha's fear flickered in her eyes, but she masked it with a sneer, her voice low and venomous. "You'll fail, Juniper. You always do." Her words stung, but they didn't cut like before. I was done letting her define me. I turned to Leonard, my voice steady. "Let's finish this." He nodded, pulling out a pen, and I felt the weight of the moment like stepping onto a new path. I glanced at the door where Preston had stormed out, his absence a dull ache. I'd hoped he'd stay, maybe see me differently, but I couldn't wait for him anymore. Sheila moved closer, her presence a quiet strength. "I've got a lawyer friend who can help," she said softly, slipping me a card with a name and number. "Call her tonight." I took it, my fingers brushing hers, and nodded a silent thank you. Her belief in me was a spark fanning the fire Dad had lit. The room was still simmering, Marjorie whispering furiously to Bailey Harold, pacing like a caged animal. I caught Caleb's eye again, and he tilted his head toward the camera, his expression cryptic. I followed his gaze, noticing the memory card slot, and my mind raced. What did he know? Before I could dwell, Leonard handed me a form, his voice formal. "Sign here to acknowledge the inheritance." My hand trembled as I took the pen, the weight of Dad's trust settling over me. I scrawled my name, each letter a promise to him, to the farm, to myself. Tabitha's voice broke through, sharp and desperate. "You're signing your own ruin, Juniper. That farm's a curse and you're too weak to carry it." I paused, the pen still in my hand, and looked at her. Her words were meant to wound, but they bounced off hollow. "I'm stronger than you think," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. Her eyes widened, and for a moment the room was silent, my words a quiet thunder. I handed the form back to Leonard, my heart pounding with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I stepped back, my boots scuffing the floor, and felt a shift inside me, like a locked door swinging open. I thought of the farm at dawn, the way the mist curled over the fields, the pigs snuffling in their pens. It wasn't a curse, it was home, and I was done apologizing for loving it. I turned to Sheila, my voice low. "I'm going to need that lawyer." She smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips, and I felt a surge of purpose, not just to save the farm, but to make it thrive. Caleb approached, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've got something for you," he said, glancing at Harold. "The footage, it shows everything. Meet me outside after." My pulse spiked, the implications sinking in. The camera had caught Tabitha's venom, Harold's threats, maybe even their whispered plans. It was leverage, a weapon I hadn't expected. I nodded, my mind already spinning with possibilities, protecting the farm, exposing their lies. "Thank you," I murmured, and he slipped back to the camera unnoticed by the others. Marjorie stood, her voice cutting through the tension. "This isn't over, Juniper. We'll fight you every step." I met her gaze, unflinching. "Then fight?" I said, my words simple but heavy. "I'm ready." Her face paled, and I saw the first crack in her confidence, a flicker of doubt. I turned to leave, my steps deliberate, each one grounding me in my choice. The farm was mine, not just in name, but in spirit, and I'd build it into something they couldn't touch. Outside, the Ohio dusk was cool, the sky streaked with pink and gold. I paused by the office steps, the lawyer's card in one hand, Dad's doodle in the other. The weight of the day pressed down, but I stood taller, my shoulders squared. I slipped the doodle back into my pocket and pulled out a single seed I'd found in Dad's old coat that morning, a tiny, hard promise of growth. I pressed it into the soil by the steps, my fingers lingering in the dirt, and stood, my eyes fixed on the horizon, steady and unbroken. The dusk air clung to my skin as I left the lawyer's office, the seed I'd planted by the steps, a quiet vow. My hand tightened around Sheila's lawyer's card, its edges sharp against my palm. I'd signed the papers, claimed the farm, and walked out with my head high, but the weight of what came next settled heavy in my chest. Tabitha's final jab, Marjorie's threat, they lingered. but it was the silence from Preston that cut deepest. I'd hoped for a glance, a word, anything, but he'd vanished into the chaos. A week later, the farm was alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. I stood in the yard watching volunteers from town haul old lumber and scrub rust off the tractor. The trust fund's first check had cleared, and I'd poured it into repairs feed and a community cleanup day. Locals showed up with gloves and thermoses of coffee, their faces weathered but kind. A woman named Lila, who'd known Dad from church, handed me a thermos, her eyes crinkling. "Your dad always shared his harvest," she said. "We're here for you." Her words warmed me, a reminder of Dad's roots in this place, roots I was fighting to keep alive. I moved through the crowd, directing folks to tasks, my voice steadier than I felt. The barn's roof needed patching, and the pig pens were getting new troughs. A teenage boy, Nate, shyly asked about the sows, and I showed him how to check their water, his grin sparking a flicker of pride in me. This was what Dad had wanted, a farm that breathed, that brought people together. But as I handed out tools, I caught whispers not from the volunteers, but from a phone call I'd overheard that morning. Tabitha's voice, sharp and bitter, spreading rumors online. "She's a greedy fraud. She'd said her words, leaking through a neighbor's screen. She's stealing our family's legacy." The rumors stung, but they weren't the only blow. I'd seen posts on a local forum, anonymous but vicious, calling me a dreamer who'd bankrupt the farm. I knew Tabitha's handiwork, her way of twisting truth to wound. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the volunteers, but my stomach churned. Had I been naive to think I could change their minds? I glanced at the fields, the soil freshly turned, and felt a pang of doubt. Dad's trust was a gift, but it was also a target, and I was exposed, standing alone in the open. Caleb's text came through as I was stacking hay bales. "Got the footage," it read. "Meet me at the diner tonight." My pulse quickened. The will reading video, the one that had caught Tabitha's venom and Harold's threats, was in his hands. I'd barely slept since he'd hinted at it, my mind racing with what it could mean. Proof maybe of their lies, their greed. I texted back a quick, "Thanks, meet you at 7," and tucked my phone away, my hands trembling with possibility. If that footage showed what I hoped it could, shift everything, turn their words against them. I walked to the edge of the yard where a group of farmers was unloading fencing wire. One, an older man named Ray, clapped my shoulder. "Saw your dad's will got folks riled up," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "You're doing right by him." His words were a balm, but they couldn't erase the tension coiling inside me. I nodded, forcing a smile, and handed him a coil of wire. The community support was real, but it felt fragile, like a thread that could snap if Tabitha's rumors took hold. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the fields, I spotted a familiar truck pulling up. Preston. My heart stuttered. He hadn't called, hadn't texted since the will reading. He stepped out, his city jacket out of place among the work boots and flannel. I froze, unsure whether to approach or retreat. He scanned the crowd, his eyes landing on me, and for a moment I saw the boy who'd helped me name the piglets, not the man who'd turned away. He started toward me, his expression unreadable, and I braced myself, the weight of his silence and the farm's future pressing down, locking me in place. Preston's boots crunched on the gravel as he approached, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his city jacket stiff against the farm's worn edges. I stood rooted, the volunteers' chatter fading behind me, my heart caught between hope and dread. His eyes, once so familiar, darted away, settling on the barn instead of me. I waited, my breath shallow, for him to speak, to explain why he'd come after leaving me to face the family alone. The air was heavy with the scent of fresh hay and engine oil, but all I felt was the chill of his distance. He stopped a few feet away, his voice low, almost swallowed by the evening breeze. "I heard about the cleanup," he said, glancing at the bustling yard. "Looks like you're serious about this." His words were neutral, but they carried a weight, an apology he wouldn't say outright. I nodded, my throat tight, unsure if I wanted his approval or his regret. "I'm doing it for Dad." I said, my voice quieter than I meant, but steady. "And for me." Preston shifted his jaw, working like he was chewing on words he couldn't spit out. "I saw Tabitha's posts," he said, finally, his eyes flicking to mine, then away. She's got people talking, saying you're in over your head. My stomach twisted, the sting of her rumors sharper in his voice. I'd known she was spreading lies, but hearing it from him, my brother, made it real, like a bruise I couldn't ignore. I'm handling it, I said. My tone clipped, hiding the ache. He didn't respond, just kicked a pebble, the small sound loud in the silence between us. I turned away, my gaze landing on the pig pens where Nate was still checking troughs, his focus a reminder of why I was here. But Preston's presence pulled me back, his hesitation a shadow over the day's progress. I wanted to ask why he'd sided with Harold, why he'd left me in that office, but the words stuck too heavy to lift. Instead, I said, "You didn't have to come." He flinched just slightly, and I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, gone as quick as it came. "I wanted to," he muttered, but it felt like a half-truth, a gesture too late to matter. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a reminder of my meeting with Caleb at the diner. The footage, my secret weapon, was waiting, and the thought of it steadied me, a quiet power I hadn't had before. I glanced at Preston, wondering if he'd care, if he'd see me differently if he knew. But his silence told me enough. He wasn't ready to stand with me, not yet. I straightened, my resolve hardening. "I've got work to do," I said, my voice firm, a dismissal I didn't feel. He nodded, his shoulders slumping, and turned back to his truck, his steps slow, like he was carrying something heavy too. As he drove off, I walked to the farmhouse. The volunteers' voices a distant hum. Inside, I pulled out Dad's old ledger, its pages brittle but filled with his neat handwriting plans for crop rotation, notes on soil health. I traced a line he'd written years ago about trying a new feed mix, and felt a pang, not just for him, but for the girl I'd been, the one who'd followed him through the fields, eager to learn. I'd changed, hardened by the will reading, by Preston's distance, by Tabitha's lies. But I was still here, still fighting. I set the ledger down and opened a drawer, finding a small tin box I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a key, rusted but solid, to a storage shed Dad had kept locked. My fingers closed around it, a question I hadn't dared ask before. What had he hidden there? I slipped it into my pocket, my mind racing with possibilities, savings tools, something to secure the farm's future. But as I stepped outside the fields, stretching dark and quiet under the stars, I felt the weight of Tabitha's rumors, Preston's half-hearted visit, and the fight still ahead. I stood still, the key cold in my hand, and let the silence swallow me, a moment of truth I couldn't outrun. I was winning, but I was alone. The morning sun spilled across the farm, painting the fields gold, a quiet promise of new beginnings. I stood at the edge of the pasture, my boots sinking into the soft earth, watching a group of kids from town scatter feed for the chickens. Their laughter carried on the breeze, sharp and bright, a sound I hadn't heard here in too long. It had been weeks since the cleanup, since Preston's visit, since I'd held that rusted key from Dad's tin box. The farm was changing, and so was I, though the scars from the will reading still ached beneath the surface. I walked toward the new co-op shed, its fresh timber gleaming in the light. The trust fund had paid for it, a space for local farmers to share tools and ideas, something Dad had always talked about. Inside, I ran my hand along a workbench, its surface smooth and untouched, and felt a flicker of pride. This was real, not just a dream, but a step towards something lasting. A girl named Sadie, barely 10, darted in, her braid bouncing. "Miss Juniper, can I help with the goats today?" she asked, her eyes wide. I smiled, nodding. "Sure thing, kid. Let's get them some hay." Her grin was a small gift, a reminder of why I'd fought so hard. The community fair was tomorrow, a chance to show what we'd built, to prove the farm wasn't a lost cause. I'd spent nights planning, sketching layouts for stalls, calling vendors for cider and honey. The work was grueling, and it felt different now, less like a burden and more like a choice. I thought of the girl I'd been, the one who'd stayed out of duty, scared to let Dad down. She was still in me, but softer, less afraid. The farm wasn't just his dream anymore. It was mine, and I was learning to carry it with open hands. As I guided Sadie to the goat pen, I spotted a letter tucked under a bucket, its envelope creased and unfamiliar. My name was scrawled on it in Marjorie's tight handwriting, and my stomach tightened. I hadn't heard from her since the will reading, since her threats to fight me. I slipped it into my pocket unopened and focused on Sadie, showing her how to brush the goat's coats. But the letter's weight lingered a shadow I couldn't shake. Was it an apology, a demand, or something worse? I pushed the thought down, unwilling to let her voice back into my head. Later, I sat on a hay bale watching the kids chase each other through the grass. Sheila joined me, her thermos of tea steaming in the cool air. She hadn't left since the will reading, showing up with advice contacts, stories of Dad I'd never heard. "You're doing good, Juniper," she said, her voice warm but firm. "This place is alive again." I nodded, my throat tight. "It's what he wanted," I said, but the words felt bigger now, like I was finally understanding them. Sheila sipped her tea, her eyes distant. "I lost my family too," she said almost to herself. "Fought over money, pride. It's a heavy thing to carry." Her words settled over me, a mirror to my own fractures, and I wondered what she'd left unsaid. I stood brushing straw from my jeans and walked to the new orchard we'd planted, its saplings fragile but rooted. Each one bore a tag, names of volunteers who'd helped, a quiet tribute. I touched a tag with Lila's name, the woman who'd brought me coffee that first day, and felt a pang of gratitude. These people, this land, they were my family now, not the one I'd lost in that office. The letter in my pocket felt heavier. Marjorie's voice, a faint echo, but I wasn't ready to face it, not yet. I looked out at the fields, the sun climbing higher, and breathed slow, the weight of the past easing just a little in the morning's quiet light. The orchard saplings swayed gently as I walked back to the farmhouse. Marjorie's unopened letter still tucked in my pocket, its presence a faint hum I couldn't ignore. The evening air was cool, wrapping around me like a soft shawl, and the farm was quiet now, the kids gone home, their laughter lingering in my memory. I stepped inside, the familiar creak of the door grounding me, and lit a single lamp, its glow warm against the worn wood walls. The house felt different, not just Dad's anymore, but mine, a space I was learning to claim. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Dad and I had shared countless breakfasts, his coffee mug always leaving a faint ring on the wood. My fingers traced one of those rings, a map of moments I'd once taken for granted. I pulled out a notebook, its pages blank, and began to write, not to anyone but to Dad, words I'd never said when he was here. I wrote about the fair, the saplings, the way Sadie's eyes lit up with the goats. I wrote about the fight, the family, the way their words had carved me open. And I wrote thank you for trusting me, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. The pen moved slow, each word, a release, a way of letting him go while holding him close. The letter from Marjorie sat beside the notebook, its edges curling slightly. I stared at it, my pulse steady, and finally opened it, the paper crisp under my fingers. Her words were measured, regretful, but sharp, no apology, just a plea to reconsider, to share the estate for the family's sake. I read it twice, waiting for the old anger to flare, but it didn't. Her voice, once a blade, was just ink, now powerless. I folded the letter and set it aside. Not to answer, not to keep, but to let it be. She was part of the past, and I was done carrying it. Outside, the stars were bright, the kind of clear night Dad loved when he'd point out constellations and tell me stories of his own childhood here. I stepped onto the porch, the boards cool under my bare feet, and looked toward the shed, the one the rusted key would open. I hadn't gone there yet, hadn't been ready, but tonight felt different. I walked across the yard, the key heavy in my hand, and unlocked the door, its hinges groaning. Inside, I found boxes of old tools, seed catalogs, a faded photo of Dad and me, my gap-toothed smile beaming as I held a pumpkin. I touched the photo, my throat tight, and set it on a shelf, a quiet promise to keep it close. Sheila's words from earlier echoed about losing her family, carrying that weight. I understood now, not just the loss, but the choice to move forward, to build something new. The farm wasn't just land, it was a story mine to tell now. I locked the shed and walked back, pausing by the new bench I'd built for Dad, its wood smooth under my hand. I sat the night wrapping around me and thought of Preston, of Tabitha, of the fight still ahead. They didn't scare me anymore, not like they had. I'd found my ground, my roots, and they were enough. I looked up at the sky, the stars steady and endless, and felt a quiet settle in me, Not peace exactly, but something close, a knowing that I was where I belonged. The fair was tomorrow, a new chapter, but tonight was mine, a moment to breathe, to be still. I leaned back, my hands resting on the bench, and let the silence hold me soft and sure like a hand I'd always known. A year had passed since the will reading, and the farm was no longer just a dream I clung to. It was alive, humming with purpose. I stood in the new barn, its rafters strung with twine lights, the air thick with the scent of fresh straw and apple cider. The anniversary event was in full swing, tables lined with jars of local jam kids, weaving through the crowd with painted faces. I wore a clean flannel, my hair loose, no longer hiding the dirt under my nails. This was me, Juniper, 29 now, and I'd grown into my own skin. I moved through the crowd, shaking hands, laughing with folks who'd become more than neighbors. Ray, the farmer, who'd helped with the fences, pressed a jar of his wife's pickles into my hands, his grin wide. "You've done your dad proud," he said, and I knotted my throat tight, not from grief, but from something warmer, fuller. The farm had new fields now planted with corn and clover, and a small shop where we sold eggs and honey. The trust fund had given us a start, but it was the work, the late nights planning with Sheila, the early mornings with volunteers that made it real. I paused by a stall watching a young woman, Ellie, arrange baskets of squash. She was 19, shy but eager, and I'd hired her to help with the books, teaching her what Dad had taught me about tracking costs. She caught my eye and smiled, a quiet confidence in her nod, and I saw myself in her, the girl who'd once thought she had to prove everything. I didn't anymore. I'd fought for this place, faced down Tabitha's rumors, Harold's lawsuit, even Preston's distance, and I'd come out stronger, not because I won, but because I chose to keep going. The crowd parted, and I saw Preston near the cider press his hands in his pockets, watching the kids play. He'd moved back to town a few months ago, showing up at the farm with tools or a quiet offer to help. We didn't talk about the will reading, didn't need to. His presence was enough, a bridge we were rebuilding one small step at a time. I waved and he waved back, his smile tentative but real. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was more than I'd expected. I slipped away from the noise, needing a moment alone, and walked to the edge of the new pasture where the grass was still young, green shoots pushing through the soil. The sun was low, casting a soft glow over the hills, and I sat on a wooden fence, my boots dangling. I thought of the woman I'd been, the one who'd walked into that lawyer's office raw with shame, certain she didn't belong. She was still in me, but quieter now, her edges smoothed by time, by choice. I'd learned to let go, not of Dad, but of the need to prove myself to people who'd never see me. A breeze stirred, carrying the faint sound of music from the barn, a local band playing something slow and sweet. I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me, and felt the farm's pulse steady and sure, like a heartbeat I'd always known. This was home, not just the land, but the life I'd built, the people who'd stayed, the ones I'd chosen to keep close. I opened my eyes, the horizon clear and endless, and took a slow breath. My heart full, not with answers, but with a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. The pasture stretched out before me, its green tips catching the last of the sun's light, and I stayed on the fence, letting the farm's quiet hum settle into my bones. I reached into my pocket, pulling out a small stone I'd found in the fields last week, smooth and warm from my touch. It wasn't much, just a piece of this land, but it felt like a tether, a reminder of what I'd carried through. The anniversary event's music drifted over softer now, and I thought of Ellie, of Ray, of the people who'd shown up when my family hadn't. They weren't bound by blood, but they'd chosen to be here, and that was enough. I stood, slipping the stone back into my pocket, and walked toward the barn where the crowd was thinning, families packing up their baskets. A mural on the barn's side caught my eye, painted by the town's kids, a bright swirl of fields and animals with Dad's name in bold letters at the center. I'd unveiled it earlier, my voice steady as I spoke about his love for this place. The kids had clapped, their faces bright, and I'd felt a shift, not just pride, but a release, like I'd given Dad's story back to the world. Inside the barn, I found Ellie tidying up, stacking chairs with a quiet focus. I joined her, lifting a chair, and we worked in silence for a moment. The clink of metal, a steady rhythm. "You're good at this," I said, nodding at her neat stacks. She blushed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Learned from you," she said, her voice shy but sure. I paused, the weight of her words sinking in. I'd become someone to learn from, not just the girl who'd fought to be seen. I smiled, setting down another chair, and felt a quiet strength, not loud or bold but deep, like roots spreading beneath the earth. As we finished, I stepped outside, the night air cool against my face. I thought of Tabitha, of Harold, of their threats that had faded into silence. The lawsuit had collapsed weeks ago, their claims crumbling under the weight of Dad's clear intent. I didn't hate them anymore, didn't need to. They'd chosen their path, and I'd chosen mine, not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. I looked at the mural again, Dad's name glowing under the twine lights, and realized the fight wasn't about winning, it was about building, about choosing what mattered over what hurt. The lesson came to me slowly, not in a flash, but in the quiet of this night. Legacy isn't land or money, it's the courage to stand for what you love, even when the world tells you it's foolish. I'd spent years carrying shame, letting their voices drown out my own. But I'd learned to listen to myself, to the land, to the people who showed up. I wasn't just saving the farm, I was saving me piece by piece, day by day. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was mine, and that was enough. I walked back to the farmhouse, the stars bright above, and felt a stillness I hadn't known before. The fight wasn't over, there'd be more bills, more doubts, but I wasn't afraid. I'd found my place not just on this land, but in myself, and no one could take that away. If you've ever had to fight for what you believe in, what was it that kept you going? Drop it in the comments, I'd love to hear your story. If this touched you, maybe give it a like, hit subscribe, or share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for carrying your own light. Here's to finding our way one step at a time.